Well, welcome back. Thanks for joining me and Amy for our fourth column at the intersection of AI and mediation. Mediation, we call it, with the A and the I switched. And it's a pleasure to be here with our friends and experts on artificial intelligence and conflict resolution, Dan Rainey and Leah Wing. I'm going to turn it over to you, Amy, to do some introductions and to kick us off here today.
Yeah, I'm super excited. We're very lucky. These are giants in the industry. They've both been very involved in dispute resolution, mediation in particular, as well as AI, and really thinking about technology and governance of that technology. And today we're going to focus our talk on their new book. They have a book out with Leah Wing, Chris Draper, Scott Cooper, and Dan Rainey. It is Governing Artificial Intelligence. It's part of a series, Issues in Online Dispute Resolution. This is volume 3. It was just recently published by Brill. And really excited to have Leah and Dan here with us. Leah is the director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution and the honors director in the Department of Legal Studies at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She is also co-founder, board member, and 2023 president of the International Council for Online Dispute Resolution, otherwise known as ICODR. She also led the development of NCTDR ICODR online dispute resolution standards. She has served as a researcher, as a leader. So much more I could say about Leah in this space. She's really been a champion and very much involved. And right there with her has been Dan Rainey. He's the founder and principal in Holistic Solutions, in which he and his wife, Julia Morelli, founded in 1996 as a home for their practice in dispute resolution, organizational development, and communication. He is a fellow of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. He's a founding member as well of ICODR, mentioned earlier, an international consortium that has really been a driver in developing standards and thinking about governance. There's so much more I could say about each of them, but we want to kind of get right into it and get as much we can from their expertise. They both also really bring the practitioner lens to the table, which is really important to Bill and I for this column and podcast. So I'll throw the baton back to you.
Thanks, Amy. And it's really great to be here with you, Leah and Dan. I'm really excited about this new governance book that you've written together and with your co-authors. There's a number of focuses in the text on defining what AI is and what governance of AI is, talking about safety and how the industry views safety, the role of regulation, the role of international standards, and then you use, and perhaps this is the most exciting part for me as a mediator and someone who has used these standards before, you use the international online dispute resolution standards as a case example for considering how AI might be governed. And so perhaps you might start there in chapter 5 for us to tell us a little bit about how AI might be governed in the context of those standards, particularly how AI might be governed in the context of mediation. And then we'd love to turn, and we'll have time to do this in a minute, to what you think the future could look like, what your hopes and dreams and fears are for the future of AI at the intersection of AI and mediation.
Well, I'm happy to speak to that, having written chapter 5. First of all, let me just thank you, Bill and Amy, for inviting us. It's wonderful to be part of your podcast conversation and in a broader way to begin to engage with even more colleagues in the field. I'm actually going to flip it over to Dan. I think that setting the context for chapter 5 inside of the larger questions about regulation and the ecosystem of governance may help set the stage for moving down into what we're all four of us are deeply interested in, is how do we connect ethics to practice? So Dan, can I just hand it over to you to say something about the book in general?
Sure, be happy to. We started out thinking about this book because you can't not think about AI. It's everywhere and it's going to be everywhere. And so we looked at what we consider to be 3 potential domains for governance of AI. For regulation and law, which we think is necessary at some level, but which is probably never going to be adequate to govern artificial intelligence. And I could go on and on about why that is, but it's pretty obvious. The second thing we looked at was international standards, like things coming out of the ISO. And those are good and they can address things directly, but they're time consuming. They cross border, which is good, but they also are voluntary. The thing that we settled on at the end is standards that are developed for particular professional uses. And so our argument basically is that if you look at any one of those three domains, you're probably not going to have an adequate approach to governance. But if you look at all three of them together, you may have a shot at governing artificial intelligence. And just a very, very quick notion from my end, I'll kick it back to Leah, and she can take up most of our time. If you're a mediator, you're going to be using AI. And there are 2 or 3 ways that you can do it. One is you can rely basically on things like ChatGPT and Claude and Gemini and just use what's there to do the things that are obvious, to make suggestions for resolving conflict, et cetera. Or if you're really a techie, you can create your own GPT and have the ability for that AI to handle your intake and other functions. But what most mediators in the long run are probably going to do is they're going to rely on technology that has been built for them for a specific purpose. And we're seeing that already, and we're going to see a lot more of it. And the reason that what Leah wrote is so important is that we think that where the rubber meets the road with governance of AI is going to be in those professional standards and guidance that are done for people who are doing specific kinds of work, not just mediation, but any kind of work using AI. But if you have a well-developed and well-enunciated set of guidance and standards for your profession, mediation being one of them, that does 2 things. It tells the people who are using the AI what they should be looking for to operate ethically. And it also tells the developers of AI what you're interested in as a profession. And since that's your customer, you probably want to pay attention to that. And so we think that the notion of professional standards is, in my mind, the most important element in governing AI for people who are using it for professional work. And I'll stop there and kick it back over to Leah.
Thanks, Dan. So with that context, I guess I would say one of the things that we thought was intriguing, exciting, somewhat unique, not entirely unique, but somewhat unique. If we look at the issue of governing AI, which is well beyond dispute resolution, but just in general, if we look at it from 300,000 feet down, so to speak, we've got these 3 typical categories for governance. And because AI, technology in general, but AI particularly for our conversation, is a significant disruptor of silos by discipline, by profession, by legal jurisdiction, then we need to attend to that reality as we think about governance mechanisms. And so what we found exciting is that we argue that the online dispute resolution standards were born inside of a profession of dispute resolution, originating inside of 2 international organizations. So they both cross jurisdictions as well as cross, since dispute resolution is handled in all sectors of society and in all societies, they were designed to attempt to have relevance. So they're thin enough, we hope, that they can translate across mediation, arbitration, facilitation, use in court-related judicial interventions, and also have relevance to work cross legal jurisdictions. Now, we're also assuming, because technology moves so fast, that standards will frankly almost always be behind. And so standards are really the basement. They're the floor of what's acceptable. And so we will need to continue to be engaged with our colleagues all around the world to try to keep the standards as updated as possible, but also there needs to be a proliferation of guidance. So the guidance is, how do we implement? What are best practices, which are more specific guidance, and also aspirational principles, which are to help us to continue to think about how this relates to both governance mechanisms, but also to practice. So if I could just speak to that specific chapter, I would say what we try to accomplish in the chapter is to talk about how the development of the ODR standards is reflective of both international standards development and professional standards development. And I will say we are not even 1 year in to this incredibly exciting accomplishment on the international scale, which is that the International Organization for Standardization, ISO, has adopted in full the iCoder and NTCDR ODR standards. And they did that on March 10th, 2025. And we're just speaking in January 2026. So after a number of years of negotiation, this organization that has 175 countries' standards bodies agreed to adopt the standards in full. They did make one change, which is that ISO requires that you can't use the word must inside of standards. And so they switched that to the word should. But otherwise, they're seen as standards. They have focused on them for e-commerce. But it gives us an example of how we hopefully believe that they are relevant across different sectors and also different forms of dispute resolution. So now grounding it, going to speak specifically around mediation, I will say that there are 9 standards, and each of the standards should have resonance with kind of the norms and the typical professional standards around confidentiality, around accessibility, around legality, et cetera. So they can go beautifully synced with typical standards that exist, like the AAA and the ACR standards, just as an example. But we have found internationally that there's a dearth of standards around technology as it relates to dispute resolution, and that was really the engine behind the desire to create ODR standards. And the first ODR standards were initiated and promulgated in 2009, and then there was another set promulgated in 2017 by the organizations, and then they were updated in May 2022, which was about 6 months before the rest of the world became exposed to this free use of generative AI. And so these standards now include specific paragraphs that directly relate to AI. And if people have not yet looked at them, we encourage you to do so. You can find them at icoder.org or in the publications page at ODR.info. And we hope that, number one, since they are standards and not guidance, that they will stimulate conversation inside of organizations, professional organizations, membership organizations, and among individual practitioners to think about, how would I implement this? How can I carry out the use of AI in a way that may cause me to alter my protocol? The way that I do an intake, the way I communicate, the way that I can harness AI for public good, for the benefit of the disputants at the table. And also, what is my responsibility regarding protecting myself as a third party as I harness the fourth party of technology and AI? And what's my responsibility regarding transparency about the use of AI for the disputants? And I remember in conversations I've had with Amy previously, she articulated so well that there sometimes can be a real tension between choosing efficiency, which may mean we really rely on technology such as AI, and then also issues around ethicality and transparency. And I think that AI is a magnifier of the benefits of employing technology and a magnifier of the risks. So with that, I'll be happy to hand it over if you guys have more questions or engagement, or Dan has things to share.
Yeah, first of all, that's super helpful. And also for anyone listening to this, you'll see the article of companies, the podcast, and of course we have a link to the book. And I really get it, read it, and get further information about this because it's so helpful and so important. And sort of on that note, I love where you sort of left that, Leah, and right away I'm thinking about with all the tensions and sort of, and kind of the weird morass, right? Where, you know, in some places there are regulations around AI and others there aren't. Certainly here in the United States, we do not have the same sort of regulations that exist in Europe, for example, more generally when it comes to AI. So what do you see as sort of the future and way forward, especially for the mediators out there who are reading, listening, and thinking, yeah, how do I make these decisions? How do I navigate these waters? What do you think? Do you have any good advice or thoughts about the future?
Go ahead, Leah.
Well, I would say that at the end of the book, as part of our concluding chapters, we do list a series of questions that we hope are very relevant specifically to practitioners. And I go back to Dan's comment about the urgency of the practitioners in the field weighing in with what I would call the fifth parties, which are the gatekeepers to access to justice. And those are the software developers and the LLM architects. And so if we can weigh in with them and state this is what we need. So many of us are taking AI tools off the shelf, so to speak, and then applying them. But increasingly, we can have a footprint in helping those that are developing tools be either from our field or when we ask for boutique designs that we could say, these are the standards that must live up to. And I will say this week, I heard from a colleague who said he's creating an ODR platform and he told the people who are developing it, you must develop it according to these standards. And that's exciting. That's exciting to hear. So the other thing I will just point you towards as practitioners is that on the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution website, there's an ODR provider list. And providers who have committed to live up to the standards are listed at the top, and you can see that as a distinguishing feature. And that may be helpful if you decide to use an ODR platform. And I know Dan has many ideas around practitioner application as well.
Well, and I'll just say that the thing that got me interested in dispute resolution in the first place, my background is communication theory, was the fact that what do you do as a third party, as a mediator? You manage communication, you create situations where communication can occur, you deal with information and data in one way or another that's on the table, and you manage group dynamics. And very early on for me in the mid 90s, it occurred to me that the three things that we do over and over again as mediators are three of the things that are directly affected by the use of technology, way before AI. And as Leah has said, AI simply is an accelerator or a magnifier of those things that we can do, that can change those things that we can do, put it that way. My hope in terms of governing AI is really pretty straightforward. And that is, my experience in online dispute resolution is that people started using technology and didn't even acknowledge that they were using technology. If you said to somebody, you're dealing in online dispute resolution, they would say, you're crazy. I'm not, I'm just using the telephone, or I'm just using email, or whatever it might be. And we spent a long time integrating technology into mediation practice at the ground level without thinking about what changes we really needed to be considering because we were using that technology. My hope for governing AI is that we don't do the same thing with AI, that as we begin to use it, we ask the questions about what does this change? What does this do to the way I do business? And we think about that critically as we go forward, because we didn't do that very well with technology generally. And so if you can take the approach that we took in this book and say, look, there are lots of ways to think about this. Some of them are better than others, but at least think about it.
I love that idea, Dan. When technology was adopted, I wasn't a professional yet. Okay, I'm just going to put that out there. The phone, internet. I've always used email. I've always had a cell phone, right? But I feel like this might be different. This time around might be different, and it might be moving towards this idea of let's think about how to use AI with intention instead of having a car phone, having a cell phone, having no phone at all. It's just your computer and we're on Zoom 24/7. The rapid progression and maybe the concern folks have expressed about AI and potential lessons we've learned from the slow adaptation of technology and the slow recognition that we are in fact using technology, maybe that's helped us think with intention around AI including in our field of conflict resolution. Do you think that's true, or do you get the sense that it's actually just moving way too fast and we're so far behind already?
Well, I would bifurcate that question. Is it moving so fast that we can't control it? Absolutely. And there is nothing we can do to stop that. And if there are two things. One is developers are going to do it. If they can do it, they will do it. They won't ask if they should do it. They'll just do it. And if people want to act badly, there's enough out there for them to use to act badly that they're going to act badly. So what I would say is that the meaningful questions get asked not at the very highest level, the people who are producing Claude and producing ChatGPT. The meaningful questions are being asked by people who are interacting with us as mediators and producing things that we may use. That's where we can have an impact. And I think maybe the warning signs that have been pointed to by people generally about AI may be a reason for us to pay more attention. I hope that's the case.
I'm really struck by your question, Bill, and I'm pondering out loud a response. So bear with me, but I'm thinking that as we used email when it first became public, and we began to use it to communicate, and then some people, Ethan Ketch and Janet Rifkin, said this is going to be used that will either impact people by causing misunderstanding or purposeful harming. And so we're going to need to find ways of intervening to prevent that or to reduce and resolve those misunderstandings and that hurt. So they created the first online ombuds office, and then they created the National Center, and then the field grew in this way. But I think for practitioners, we started using fax machines and didn't think about the impact. We started using email, and then the cloud became available. So as we use it in the rest of our life, we started to integrate it. And I think that the rapidity of an explosion of use of video conferencing with COVID meant that people did go, this is different. I'm not quite sure how to use it because it wasn't yet integrated into most of our lives in a daily way. And so I do feel like we had more discussions in the field beginning at that time about the use of technology, whereas many people were already using technology. And the same thing happened, but at a more accelerated rate when generative AI became freely available to the public. I will also say two more things here. One is that I think the term online dispute resolution made sense when it first began. And now, frankly, if anyone's not using any form of technology, that would be unusual. So what we're really talking about is dispute resolution practice. And I want to make that clear because some people are still saying in the field, oh, I don't do online dispute resolution, but they're using the cloud and they're using email and they're using video conferencing. And now they're starting to think about using AI. So the ODR standards should find relevance to all practitioners, I would argue. The other thing is that there is a document that people may want to explore. It's also found in the publications page of the center, ODR.info, and it's on framing the parameters of online dispute resolution. And it articulates the changes in reliance on technology, including AI. And so that can be helpful for practitioners to say, where in my process am I relying on different forms of technology, including AI, and how does that impact my protocol, my responsibilities? And so that may be useful if they choose to map their practice and see, I think I might need to be more transparent here about how I'm using it, or I need to consider what the risks are. But the other thing is that the standards also require that people pay attention to when they should use technology, because it's not just a threat, it also is a benefit, and it increases access to justice for many.
Yeah, that's really helpful and very hands-on, and I hope people check out that document, because the other thing, and this is just going back to something you said earlier, Leah, is people have to think about liability too, right? And so I think third parties, I think a lot of neutrals are fearful, right? They think, oh, if I touch that, it's like, do not touch Happy Fun Ball. Do you remember that from Saturday Night Live? I don't know if anyone remembers that episode, but I think there's this fear that, they're going to do something wrong. But having things like the standards, having your book, having that sort of guidance as well, and thinking intentionally and mapping out a practice and thinking through interventions and how to properly use these tools that are so powerful, especially because AI is so powerful, that when things go badly, they can go really badly. I think that it might, just kind of going back to Bill's question as well, it might instigate more governance, more attention to governance, because people are looking for some sort of, governance or standards or something, because they don't want to make a mistake. They don't want to end up getting sued. They don't want to be dropped from a neutral panel, violate ethical rules. So I think that all of that is kind of helping maybe for people to actually pay more attention. I don't know what you think about that.
I agree with you about that. And, I think the thing that I hear most often when I talk to people about using AI is the fear of doing something wrong, the fear, particularly around confidentiality, but other things as well. And, I'll quote our colleague, Chris Draper. His analogy is that, when we developed the atomic bomb, we did it out in the desert. We did enough damage out there. This is the equivalent of a social atomic bomb, and we're testing it on Main Street.
Mhm.
And people are rightfully anxious about it, but also excited about it. And I hope, as we've been talking, I hope that is what drives discussion about how to use it safely. Because basically his definition of safety, which I think is important, is that if you can find a way to reduce the probability of a bad outcome, you are ethically bound to do that, whatever that looks like. But so I hope that conversation is ongoing.
Absolutely. And it's exciting to have this conversation with you all. I really hope our viewers check out your new book and check out the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. Of course, we'll drop the links into the column and hopefully in the text right under this video if you go to YouTube. But Leah and Dan, I really want to thank you for all of your work in the field. I want to thank you for this short conversation with me and Amy this afternoon. And hopefully folks will continue to think with intention or begin to think with intention about AI, governance, and mediation and conflict resolution. Thank you both. We'll see you all
Yeah.
soon.
Thank you for me as well. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thanks for
Thank
having
you.
us.